Ice warnings have been issued for parts of Britain tonight as temperatures plummet and snow and sleet hit the country. The Met Office has issued yellow alerts for southern England and southern Wales, effective until tomorrow morning. An amber cold health alert has also been issued for parts of England, in line with the government's warning system, with the cold snap set to continue throughout the rest of this week. Sir Keir Starmer visited flood-hit East Midlands regions today, promising that a Labour government would do more to protect people's homes. That's after Labour accused the government of being asleep at the wheel over flood warnings. More than 160 flood warnings remain in place across the country, and over 1,800 properties have been damaged. The German football legend Franz Beckenbauer has died at the age of 78. He captained Germany to World Cup victory in 1974, then won the tournament again as manager in 1990. He was nicknamed the Kaiser, and he helped guide Bayern Munich to 3 successive European Cups. His family say he died peacefully in his sleep. Politics, and Chris Skidmore has formally resigned as an MP, triggering another by-election. The government's former net zero czar quit in protest over what he says are plans to prioritise and politicise new oil and gas licences. That's as MPs debate the offshore petroleum bill tonight in the House of Commons. It's his second reading tonight. And if it passes, the legislation will mandate that licences for oil and gas projects in the North Sea are awarded annually. Now, the actor Idris Elba has been in London today, calling for an immediate ban on machetes and so-called zombie knives as he launched his Don't Stop Your Future campaign. The Hollywood star spoke to families of victims today and folded sets of clothes, each representing someone who died as a result of knife crime, were displayed in Parliament Square in central London. Last summer, the Home Office did say tougher measures on weapons would be introduced, but legislation hasn't yet been passed. Idris Elba says although some deterrents are working, much more needs to be done. That's the news on GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker. This is Britain's News Channel.
Good evening. One of the most extraordinary things about all miscarriages of justice is how long it takes to sort them out. And of course, I'm talking about the sub-postmaster scandal, and I'm talking about the fact that the whistle was actually blown as long ago as 2009. Yes, back in 2009, some serious doubts were put into the public's mind, into Parliament's mind, that actually the Horizon computer system wasn't actually working and that innocent people were being convicted. And yet, despite that, despite quite a lot of publicity at the time, the prosecutions kept on coming up until 2015. 736 people were convicted of taking money from the post office. And it's an awful scandal. 4 that we know of have taken their lives. Many other people's lives were ruined. It looks to be the single biggest miscarriage of justice in British judicial history. And the odd thing is that whilst this story has kept on rumbling, I didn't see any of it as an MEP. It wasn't deemed to be a European issue, and indeed it wasn't. But suddenly MPs are coming out of the woodwork saying, yes, we had people in our constituency coming on to us complaining. And yet it takes a docudrama on ITV to reignite public debate in it. Well, all I can say to that is better late than never. Now, a huge amount of media attention has been focusing on the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey, because he was the competent minister from 2010 when the scandal was at its height. But I raised a little question this morning. You know, when Keir Starmer, or should I say Sir Keir Starmer, because of course he was knighted for the 5 years that he acted as Director of Public Prosecutions, virtually every week, Starmer boasts to us about his time at the DPP and the job that he did. But I asked a question this morning on social media, which was, why are we not discussing Keir Starmer's role in this? Why do I say that? Well, because, quite simply, the Prosecution of Offences Act, which came in 1985, allowed private prosecutions. And what the Post Office did in every single one of these cases is they were able to bypass the police, they were able to bypass the Crown Prosecution Service and bring private prosecutions. But the Director of Public Prosecutions, the DPP, which Starmer did, I repeat, from 2008 until 2013, has power under Section 6.2 of the Act to take over private prosecutions. So actually, Starmer had the power to take over these prosecutions, or indeed to say enough. And it's impossible to believe, given the hundreds of prosecutions that were happening, given the media commentary that was taking place at the time, that he wasn't aware of it. I'm not actually accusing him of anything. I'm just asking why, as DPP, he didn't ask questions, he didn't intervene. And I'd like to know from MPs, did they at the time write to Starmer when he was the DPP? And maybe some of this stuff will start to come out over the next few days. Of course, as usual, whenever I say anything, it must be wrong. And everyone said I was wrong, including Twitter, or X as they're now called, who put up a community notice to say, beware of what I've said. Well, you might actually notice now, if you look at X, that community notice has been taken down. And a man called John Hyde, he replied that I was wrong. Funny enough, he's wrong. He's the deputy news editor for the Law Society magazine. He says in his bio, we should all try to be as nice as we can, if possible. He hit back at me, and he's now had to admit he was wrong. Starmer, as DPP, could potentially have played a role in all of this. Now, the big question, I think, is what next? And given that it's taken us many, many years to get to this point, I guess we have to ask ourselves a question. Should all the convictions be overturned? Now, normally, I wouldn't support such a proposition. I'd say that it's wrong to blanket say everybody's guilty or everybody's innocent. But given the passage of time and given the age of many of these people, for them to actually physically be able to face going through their own appeals would be off-putting to many. And frankly, if we go through that process, many would have died or by that stage be incapacitated through age. So for once, I think actually we should say that everybody that was convicted in the Horizon scandal has been exonerated, even if there were, amongst the 736, one or two bad apples. That's my take. That's my view. Let me know what you think. Farage at gbnews.com. Now, a couple of years ago, Nick Wallace wrote a book, The Great Post Office Scandal. As a result of it, the Horizon Scandal Fund was set up. And I'm joined by trustee Helen Lacey this evening and by fellow trustee David Chaplin. Helen, all of this was written a couple of years ago. Are you frustrated how long this has all taken?
Oh, I'm terribly frustrated, absolutely. I mean, 3 years ago we spoke to Nick and he mentioned writing this book. We published it in November 2021 and it's taken until the ITV drama to really get it into the public arena, which I think is really, very, very disappointing for the sub-postmasters that are still waiting for money.
But it is better late than never, isn't it?
Well, 25 years for some people. It's a long time, an awfully long time.
But I mean, you're in the studio talking about it.
Yeah.
As we speak, the House of Commons is debating it. Yes, it may have taken an ITV drama, but what do we do? How do we get justice for these people?
Well, I mean, we're trustees of the Horizon Scandal Fund, and what we do is we support sub-postmasters with, I'm hoping, stopgap money. This is what it was designed to do. This is why we set it up in the first place. We were thinking that the Horizon Scandal Fund would only last for a year or two, maybe, and it's now 2 years, and there's still no sign that they're going to get proper compensation. So this stopgap has not been a stopgap. I mean, this is now really helping or trying to help sub-postmasters that really deserve better compensation and proper compensation from the Post Office and the government.
And a lot of them have been literally financially ruined by this.
Absolutely ruined. I mean, only this week we've had several applications, people being threatened with eviction. We've paid their rent to stop them being evicted. We've got people that need counselling, desperately need counselling because they're absolutely traumatised. The list goes on. I mean, we've helped in so many ways.
Yeah, and of course they're sort of, in a way, they're pillars of the local community, aren't they?
Absolutely.
They're trusted figures that people of all ages go to. So for them, the public humiliation of all of this...
Totally humiliated. And really what I want to say as well is that a lot of people are not coming forward for compensation. They're not coming forward to have their convictions quashed because they are absolutely traumatised and they just do not want to reopen those wounds.
Yeah, they can't face going through
it. They can't.
All.
And they're also not coming to the charity sometimes because I know that they are proud people and they just don't want to reopen those wounds. And we completely understand that. So I would implore anyone listening that needs help to approach us at the Horizon Scandal Fund, say what your story is in a very, very short way. I'm not saying you've got to fill in a lengthy form or anything like that, but please come forward.
And will you respect their confidentiality?
Absolutely.
Because
completely.
That's key, isn't it?
Yes, we've already helped about 35 people, but my take is we shouldn't be helping. We shouldn't need the charity. The government and the Post Office should be compensating them properly now.
Well, they're going to have to be pushed a bit further before they do it. And David Chaplin, I mean, as I say, thinking about this and thinking what can be done and given that passage of time with many people that we just talked about, is the blanket exoneration the way forward with this?
Well, there's a couple of things about the blanket exoneration. One is obviously, yes, we want their names to be cleared.
Yeah.
And we've always said it's better that one guilty person goes free than
hundreds.
Are convicted when they are innocent. So that's one way forward, which ironically we had a discussion between the trustees today would result in all of those people getting £600,000 because that's what the government has offered. And we must make this clear, and I don't think Rishi Sunak's made this clear yet, is that the £600,000 they've been offered is a final payment. People keep referring it in government to an interim payment, which it isn't. If you accept the £600,000, but you think you're owed more, which many of them should get, they won't get.
Why?
Any. Why shouldn't they? Because their lives have been completely ruined for 25 years. They've lost their house, they've lost their dignity, and they've lost their opportunity to earn. So I think if you lost your opportunity to earn for 25 years, Nigel, I think you'd be looking for more than £600,000, wouldn't you?
No, I get that.
Yeah.
I get that.
That's why they should be getting their money now. So our biggest thing, though, as the fund, as Helen said, we're there to stopgap while people haven't got money. So overturning the convictions, if it did result in this rather unintended consequence of £600,000 of them all straight away, may be one way of going, but it would have to be an interim payment. But the other thing is it might just... the more important thing is making sure they get recompense. They want justice as well, but they want justice and recompense. Some may not. Some may just want to be able to draw a line under this whole episode, which is, is absolutely their choice. But the key thing is also to get them that compensation as well as getting their names cleared.
How long, Helen, before Number 10 call you in, do you think? How long before the Prime Minister calls you in and resolves this? Do you feel that you're now winning?
I really do hope so. I really do hope so. But as I said before, I can't believe it takes the ITV drama to get this out.
Well,
I mean, all the MPs are now jumping up and down, but they've known about it for a long, long time, 15 years. Nick Wallace has been reporting on this since 2010, as has people like Tom Withrow from The Times, as has Carl Flinders from Computer Weekly. This has been going on for a long, long time.
And Private Eye, of course.
And Private Eye, of course, yes, sorry, I forgot about
his lot has
Private
been
Eye.
an absolute...
No, Private Eye do deserve a mention in dispatches here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they
certainly do.
But the MPs, they've all known about this for ages. And I can't believe, the publicity this has had over the last week, which is brilliant. I'm not knocking it. Please don't get me wrong. But it should have happened ages ago. And, and they're now all getting on the bandwagon, and saying, oh, yes, we need to do something about it. But why didn't they do it ages ago?
Helen, I understand your frustration with the whole system. David, I take your point that lives have been ruined for up to a quarter of a century. Well done for what you've done. You've been absolutely in the right place. I think you are beginning to win. I don't think it'll happen overnight, but I think you are actually going to win. I think there is a moral case here that is absolutely overwhelming. And there are people in very powerful senior positions very, very worried, but they can't stop this tide. It's heading in the right direction at very long last. In a moment, we'll discuss a former Tory energy minister who dramatically resigns on Friday to cause a by-election. Well, new oil and gas licences have been debated in second reading today in the House of Commons. In a moment, we'll find out what's been said and how big is the rebellion within the Conservative Party.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What are your thoughts on the victims of the Horizon scandal? Lee says, completely agree, Nigel. These people need to be exonerated immediately. Compensation is a must, ASAP. One viewer says, I agree that all those convicted should be exonerated. Michael says, better that 10 guilty men go free than one innocent man is found guilty. I'm not sure everybody would agree with those odds, Michael. I was suggesting they might be the other way round, that there might be a couple of wrong uns amongst the 736. And finally, Ken says, and a lot of people will agree with this, the senior people at the post office who showed gross negligence in the handling of the post office scandal should face prosecution and possible custodial sentences. Well, it isn't just gross negligence, Ken. You know, they used their own investigators, they used their own prosecutors, they were able to bypass the police, to bypass the CPS, and they were left completely to their own devices. And there is a large element, I think, in what happened that was nothing less than utterly vindictive and nasty. So, yes, people should ultimately be held to account. And that's a lot more than losing an honour for one particular woman, even if 1 million people have signed that petition. It wasn't just down to her. Now, the Conservative Party is constantly split. There are, I don't know how many different families of Conservative MPs, but one of them, Chris Skidmore, was, of course, an energy minister, very committed to the net zero agenda, and dramatically on Friday afternoon resigns as a Member of Parliament and says he wants to force a by-election, even though his constituency is going to be abolished at the next election. For some, it's a principled move. For others, it's utterly cynical because they say he's heading off to get a job in the Green lobby. But this afternoon, this debate on whether we should be pushing for new oil and gas licences in the North Sea has been taking place in Westminster. I'm joined by Olivia Utley, GB News' political correspondent. The Skidmore resignation came, completely out of the blue.
Well, exactly, and it utterly dashed Rishi Sunak's hopes for a quiet start to 2024. To resign as an MP is a really radical move. It's a really big move. We often see ministers resign them whip because they disagree with the Prime Minister or the government on a particular issue. But actually stepping down as an MP and triggering a by-election when your party is 19 points behind in the polls is a very big step to take. Lots of people in the Conservative Party who I've been speaking to are angry with Chris Skidmore. They think that he's doing it because he wants a job, as you mentioned there in your introduction, in the Green lobby. It's a lucrative place to work, and he's been campaigning for a long time on the net zero cause. I'm sure he'll be snapped up straight away in that Green lobby. And also, it's brought some other Conservative MPs out of the woodwork. Alok Sharma, who was the president of COP26, has said that he disagrees with the bill as well. He will probably be voting it down. And there's a handful of other MPs who might not rebel when the vote actually happens later this evening, but could possibly abstain, among them Theresa May. This is an emerging split in the Conservative Party over Rishi Sunak's attitude towards net zero, and it'll be really interesting to see just how big that rebellion is. Meanwhile, it's fascinating to see what Labour are saying about all of this, because Keir Starmer has said that he wouldn't grant new oil and gas licences for projects in the North Sea, but he wouldn't abolish
those
ones
that are
in place already. So it's a little bit of a cheeky position that Labour is taking. They are voting against the bill this evening, but if the bill gets voted through, which it almost definitely will, because easy to forget, the Conservatives do have a big majority, then Labour would allow the projects which are decided on tonight and in the future to go ahead. So they're sort of having their cake and eating it, one could argue. But this debate over net zero, we're only just seeing the beginnings of it, I think, because we're only just beginning to see exactly how Rishi Sunak feels about the whole net zero project. And on this issue, he's actually quite far to the right of the party. So I think this is something which is going to get bigger and bigger in the coming months.
Well, yes, but I mean, if you actually go out and ask Joe Public, are you worried about climate change? Yes. Do you want to have a very expensive new boiler? No. I mean, it's very interesting when you get the reactions of what people have actually got to pay, be it for electric cars or getting rid of the gas boiler. You suddenly get a very, very different reaction, and I think Sunak is reacting to it. Yeah, I mean, just back to the by-election quickly. This Kingswood constituency is being abolished at the next election, so the taxpayer is going to have to fund a by-election for a new MP for 6 months, and then the seat's abolished. And that, I think, probably makes the public pretty angry. Back to Labour, because it's really interesting. As I've mentioned, public opinion, particularly in the Red Wall, these key Red Wall seats. And I know that we've been out with the Farage at Large shows all around those Red Wall seats, and people do not want more expensive energy bills. They're pretty hacked off with where they are already. And this giving Labour some issues too, isn't it? Because this promised 28 billion a year that's going to be pumped into renewable energy, and kind of almost taking a leaf out of Biden's book with his so-called Inflation Reduction Act in America. But signs, I thought, in the New Year's speech that Starmer gave in the middle of last week, and questioning since, that even maybe Labour are beginning to row back on some of these commitments.
Well, I think that's true. The closer it gets to a general election and the closer the prospect of actually becoming Prime Minister gets for Keir Starmer, the more he's having to look over all of the very many, very expensive promises he's made over the last few years and review them. Labour has promised that it would be sound with money, that it would be sort of economically sensible, that it would not borrow for day-to-day spending. It wants to get debt as a proportion proportion of GDP down. That's difficult to do, especially if you're promising 28 billion here and a couple more billion there on green issues, childcare, whatever Rachel Reeves' next idea is. So I think, yeah, this is going to cause some problems for Labour. And Keir Starmer's instincts on this are, I expect, to go where the voting public are going. What he wants
Just
is
as
to
Rishi's
get into
doing.
Downing Street, just as Rishi's doing. And I think what's really interesting about this is it is the Red Wall, you're absolutely right, but it's also the South. Uxbridge was a fascinating by-election to watch. That was the one, had a majority, Boris Johnson had a majority of only 3,000. Everyone thought that Labour was going to snap it up, no problem at all. But it turned into, essentially, a referendum on ULEZ, that ultra-low emissions charge. And the Conservatives, campaigning on an anti-ULEZ footing, actually managed to win that seat.
The only one they won. They lost all the others.
They lost those.
24,000
majority, Selby, enormous majority. But they managed to cling on to Uxbridge because they were fighting from, if you like, an anti-green agenda. So, both Sunak and Starmer will have seen that, they will have taken it in, and they'll be thinking about that in the months ahead.
Literally fascinating, thank you. And you know, the glorious irony that it's voting against ULEZ in Uxbridge, despite the fact the previous MP had been the person who thought it was a great idea in the first place. In fact, looking at it all, we may well get two parties at the next election with almost identical manifestos. You think I'm joking? Just you wait and see. In a moment, have you heard what's been happening in Germany? Have you heard about the farmers' protests? Have you heard that today the busiest motorway in Europe was blocked for hour after hour after hour? There is something of a political and social rebellion taking place in Germany right now that is going to have major electoral implications. I will tell you all about it, because the other news channels won't, in just a moment.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Well, it feels a bit like 2016 in some countries because the populist revolt is really happening in many parts of Europe. And if you believe the opinion polls, it's certainly happening in America as well, perhaps to a lesser extent in our country. But in Germany, there really have been some remarkable events over the course of the last few days, predominantly led by farmers. And that's because the government's proposing cutting subsidies on their diesel. And this has led to extraordinary protests. I mean, in Munich alone, 5,500 tractors went in to the centre of the city. I was told earlier on today the A2, which is the busiest motorway in Europe, was blocked for some period of time. Well, to sort of try and get some sense of how big this is and what it all means, I'm joined by a member, Alternative for Deutschland, member of the European Parliament, Joachim Kors, who joins me down the line. Joachim, good evening. Welcome to the show.
Yes, good evening, Nigel. It's good to see you, and we miss you in the European Parliament.
Well, thank you. I mean, I know the European Parliament misses me, but apart from the fine company of some members, I got to tell you, I don't particularly miss it. But please give. I know. Please give us, because actually, you know, traditional media in Britain are not giving much coverage of the situation in Germany. Give us some idea of how widespread this farmers' protest has been and who else has joined in.
Okay, thank you, Nigel, to be here. This is a good day for Germany because it's the first time since 50 years the Germans are waking up and they are going to the streets, which is normally not usual in Germany. No. But today is really good because in all cities of Germany, in all big cities, in small cities, on the crossroads, on the autobahns, everywhere, they are coming with their tractors, their big machines, and they are blocking the circulation and so on. But it's all peaceful. That's very important. It's peaceful, and it's a protest who will ring in the will ring a new thing for Germany, hopefully a new future for Germany.
Well, many are saying, of course, that these protests are playing into the hands of the much feared far right, which, of course, is how the AfD is always characterised in Germany and in the United Kingdom. But there is something remarkable. The last opinion poll that I saw had your party on about 23% of the vote. And the governing party of Chancellor Scholz on about 14%. So as we look ahead, Joachim, if we look ahead to 2024, and obviously you're going to put your case, and I get that, but we've got European elections, but there are also some quite significant provincial elections coming up in Germany too, aren't there?
That's right. We have 3 very important provincial elections in Thuringia, in Saxony, and in Brandenburg. And in all 3 countries, the AfD is leading in the polls with a big difference to the next party, and that's really a strange thing. And because we are still growing, in former times, it was normal that the government could bring us into the far right wing, and said, "Oh, the AfD is unconstitutional, and it's a danger for Germany," and so on. Yeah. But the people are no longer believing that, and now the farmers show that we are the protests are on the same line as our protests we did in the last 5 or 10 years, since beginning. And now the farmers are, which are very reliable and very pleasurable for all the population in Germany. The farmers are the heart, of our country. When the farmers don't exist and don't produce food, we get hungry, and therefore we need them, and everybody knows it. Only the government doesn't know it.
Wow.
Therefore, they didn't. They are stupid to do this cuts in for the farmers.
I can't even.
Because in winter the farmers have time and they can go to the street. And therefore, it's so stupid to do it in winter. But
I can't even imagine. I can't even imagine the beginning of the asparagus season in Germany without the farmers and their produce. I know what a huge cultural thing it is. Joachim Kors, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And all right, folks, I gave you very much there the AfD view of what's going on. But I tell you what, something extraordinary is happening in Germany. Now, it is, of course, the senior service. It is the Royal Navy, without which we would not have been a great nation. We would not have been the dominant global power that we were. And in line with that, we are sending another naval vessel, HMS Richmond, down to the Gulf, down to where all the problems are at the moment. And yet, stories coming out over the weekend that we might have to mothball some of our vessels, that perhaps even the future of the Royal Marines in their active role could be threatened because we simply can't recruit enough people to join the Royal Navy. What on earth is going on? Who better to ask than Rear Admiral Chris Parry, former Royal Navy commander. Chris, help me. How, on the one hand, can we be committing the Royal Navy to more active service, whilst on the other, we might be mothballing vessels because we're short of manpower? What's going on?
Nigel, it's simply down to the fact that when you have electoral politicians, they look to the next election. They don't look far enough ahead and say, look, we've got a crisis coming down the track against totalitarian powers like Russia, China, Iran and North Korea. And we're going to need a good Navy to help the Americans secure the international seaways. And I've always said, you and I have discussed this before, Nigel, you know, the sea is the physical equivalent of the World Wide Web. And if you don't have access to that, if you can't guarantee free navigation throughout that, you ain't into globalization. Your prosperity, your trade suffers, the prices of fuel at the pumps go up. And I'm afraid to say that the conditions of service for members of the Royal Navy have deteriorated over the last 20 years. It's not just this government. Every single government has really treated life at sea as if it's just another job. And they don't make any compensation for the fact. But I can tell you now, a qualified, able seaman, leading seaman, basically is getting the same as somebody who's flipping burgers at McDonald's, and yet is expected to represent his country at international level to high standards in a really tough environment. You know, they're doing a great job there out at sea, and we treat it just like another job. I was challenged by the CEO of a leading store recently about it just being a job like any other. And I said, well, you know, your employees aren't paid, are they, to defend the knickers counter and possibly get aimed and killed at the same time. It's not just another job. And I'm afraid politicians, all of them, and I'm afraid civic society simply thinks it's just another job. It isn't. As you say, it's a leading sort of defence of our country. It's a civic duty.
Chris, very powerful words, very powerful words, and I fully understand what you're saying, and we really need a change of attitude, of culture from our politicians. Chris, I want you to stay with me for this next little item. It was announced on Friday, the death of the last SAS original. Mike Sadler, who rose in the end to become Major, was part of the long-range desert group, and they were the guys with the jeeps that at night would take the SAS in to conduct the raids and then the next day try and get them out again. You can't think of a more dangerous job to do. And Mike Sadler was legendary for his skills of navigation across the desert. He was there at the first ever successful SAS raid. He was there at the side of David Sterling, the founder of the SAS, and he was something of a legend within the regiment, and he's died aged 103. He's the last of the SAS originals. And this year, we're going to have a big event on the 6th of June. It'll be the 80th anniversary of the Normandy D-Day landings. And it's kind of like we're beginning to lose the last of that generation. A different service to yours, Chris Parry, but I just thought I'd ask you for a comment on the passing of the last SAS original.
Yeah, I mean, he's typical of the sort of chap who hasn't done it for the pay. He's done it for, obviously, his country. He's done it for the sort of things that we really want people to do, things like this again now. We've got to rediscover in Generation Z duty, sacrifice, doing something other than for the money. We're not in a transactional society when we go to war. We have to make personal sacrifices, and we have to do what this guy has done. I mean, what's really interesting, Nigel, is when you're in the desert, it's like being at sea. The navigation is incredibly difficult. And I think he must have had some sixth sense, as well as being able to use the stars and everything else. I mean, we've really got to take inspiration from these people and say, look, we may need these skills and these people again. As I said, in the face of a real challenge from fascist and communist regimes, we're looking at the 1930s again, and the possibility of actually being in conflict with these totalitarian regimes. So he would have understood exactly what we're talking about, but we need to start reviving that attitude for today.
We do. We've got to find some more Mike Sadlers. No question. Admiral Chris Parry, thank you very much indeed. Now, in the past, I fought the banks and I fought their diversity and inclusion agenda. It's one of the reasons, of course, that they wanted to debank me and others wouldn't touch me. Well, in a moment, I'm going to talk to a banker, a man who was in a senior position, who was sacked during a diversity training exercise. Just wait till you hear this story.
On Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m. Should the Lib Dem leader, Ed Davey, resign after evidence emerges that he dismissed victims of the post office scandal? Plus, is the serious issue of mental illness being exploited by some to game the welfare system? We'll also get the royal dispatch from Lady Colin Campbell after Harry and Meghan were humbled at the Golden Globes. And there's the most exciting paper review on telly. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m. Be there.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests, and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think we all understand in the modern world that we shouldn't go out of our way to unnecessarily cause offence to anybody. But we should also be able to speak freely. And one of the places where you should, I would have thought, be able to speak freely is if you're undergoing diversity training, or more specifically race training, and having a free ranging discussion of what is and what is not acceptable and how you might deal with it. Well, Carl Borg-Neil was a former design authority manager at Lloyds Bank, and he'd been there a number of years, and he was a senior manager, and he had to participate in an online training session entitled Race Education for Line Managers. But it all went horribly, horribly wrong, and Carl Borg-Neil joins me.
Thank you, Nigel.
Now, I don't know whether you needed to be educated in, what you can and can't say. Perhaps you did, I don't know. Or maybe this was completely over the top. But I guess you went into it thinking, I'll participate. And it seemed to go wrong when, and this is the account that I've got, and you are dyslexic, and you accept that can sometimes cause you to be clumsy. But I don't think you were in this case. When it comes to rap music, you asked a question as a line manager: how would you handle a situation where somebody from an ethnic minority used a word that might be considered offensive if used by a white person? And this was the N-word. We're not going to use it, but it's the N-word. And the point you were making, I think, is that in rap music, this word is quite commonly used. It's used by some as a self-descriptor. So you were asking this as a question?
Yeah, so it was a very simple question, as you pointed out. But I asked the question without using the N-word.
OK.
The trainer didn't seem to understand my question. And one of the things I've done in terms of my dyslexia is that I've developed some techniques to try and sort of mask it and help out. Those techniques vary from rephrasing the question or giving an example. Well, in this case, the obvious thing was to give an example. And the my brain, I'm told by people that have tested me, I'm very intelligent. I don't really know how intelligent I really am. But apparently the intelligent part of my brain would want to get the example out and would have forced it through my processor, which is slow. This is a problem with dyslexic people. They're often very intelligent, but they have a slow processor in terms of communication and writing. It forced it out, and out came the full N-word as an example. And that was it, really.
After which, the trainer claimed she was not only offended by your use of the word, but she was too sick to work and took 5 days off.
Yeah, I found this out much later on, that the trainer apparently had to take 5 days off work. I did on several occasions ask for sort of details of her sickness and what support she got, but I never got anything back. No. And I just had to accept it. I did offer to give her a face-to-face apology or a full written apology, and I did actually apologise in the session for having upset her. But that was never done.
You know, that was it. That was the end. You fought a lengthy legal action. You've secured a bit of a victory. But I just wonder about all of this. Well, I'm joined down the line by Alison Mallock, Director of Equality and Diversity UK. And Alison, you've heard that case, and I've no reason to think that Carl isn't telling us the 100% truth, and that's perhaps backed up by the award that the court has given him. Where are we going wrong with all of this?
I think it's really down to the trainer. And when we do our training sessions at Equality Diversity UK, we have a safe space contract. And safe space contract talks about listening to learn, to understand, to empathise, and not to minimise people's experiences. But we also give inclusive nudges. So we say that there may be some language that is unofficially out there that's okay, but in a professional environment, it's not, and we may use some of those terms ourselves in a way that people can understand what they are and what they shouldn't be saying. And therefore, we say, if somebody does upset someone or traumatise them by using inappropriate language, the way that we have to manage it is to say, when you said that, it made me feel this way, and to have that dialogue and that's part of the safe space.
Do you think someone like Carl, as an experienced bank manager, did he really need to do race education?
I think that we all do. I think that if you don't mix in those communities and you don't know those groups, it's important to know about cultural diversity, the sorts of things that people wouldn't know necessarily. So yes, even myself, I've learned a lot. I did a lot in the lockdown in terms of race because my background isn't how I look. So it's really important that we think through what is appropriate and what's not appropriate. And also, over years, things change. So language that was okay many, many decades ago is not okay now.
No, I get that. Things have always changed. I just wonder with this whole race debate, Alison, whether what we might do is just treat everybody as equal regardless of skin colour, regardless of culture, and be fair to everybody. That's my thought.
It would be great, Nigel, if that's what happened. But at the end of the day, we have this thing called imprint. And if we grow up in a household that is racist, sexist, homophobic, all of those things, that's what we take with us into the workplace. And we may use language at home. And I'll give you a classic example. There was a woman on the train the other day who was using really offensive language to her child, and it was the F word. And you couldn't believe that this child was 2 or 3 and she was using this language. And I was one of the only people that had been giving the child sweets and talking to her. And I said to her, why are you using that language? And she said, I grew up with that.
I'll have to say, well done you. If I was on that train, I'd have wanted you to do that. So, Alison, thank you for joining me. Quick thought on what Alison had to say, Carl.
To be honest, I think I agree with quite a lot of it. I think...
So she put it down to the trainer?
I think definitely a lot of people have said the trainer overreacted. And in fact, there were some comments by members of staff made anonymously through the staff feedback that she did act inappropriately. And I think some of that's in the thing.
Well, you know what, five days off sick because of what and you weren't using it in a literal sense as an example. Carl, thank you for coming on and sharing your story with us. Jacob Rees-Mogg is still a Conservative Member of Parliament. There aren't many left. They seem to be leaving at an incredibly rapid rate. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Very good to see you. Yes, and we're hoping one day you'll come Conservative Member of Parliament.
Well, I mean, it's going to be so small. So it's been a busy day.
It's been a busy day, lots of statements in Parliament, very important one on the post office scandal, which I'm going to be talking about. This is where the big state is at its absolute worst. Not the mistake in the first place, though that was heinous, but then in covering it up and refusing to put it right. And let's hope at last some effort's going to be made to put it right, though how you do that when people have gone to prison and their standing in the community has been destroyed and they've been bankrupt or died. Some committed
in the
suicide.
case of 4 taking their own lives.
It's such a wicked scandal.
Yeah, no, it really is. And a vote later on oil and gas
on
licenses.
oil and gas, where I shall be loyally supporting the government. I think they're absolutely right. Of course, we should use our own resources, and I'll be talking about that as well.
I have to say, for once, if I was in your position, I would support the government on this one as well. It makes a lovely change.
You see, you're coming back to the Tories, really.
No, they might come to me. Right, I'm back with you live tomorrow at 7 o'clock, but now let's have a look at the cold weather.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Evening, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Temperatures tumbling once more out there tonight. It's going to be a bit icy as well. We have seen a few snow flurries across parts of the south. High pressure is in control, keeping things pretty dry for most of this week. But with the easterly breeze, we have seen a few showers across the south. As I said, some sleet and snow mixed in. No huge amounts, but nevertheless, could see a covering in places. And wherever we've got showers, could be icy. So we do have a Met Office ice warning in place across the south for those slippery conditions into the early hours. Further north, some stubborn fog patches across northern Scotland, and many places dipping to or below freezing. Parts of the east may just stay above freezing, where we keep a bit more cloud. And some will start a bit grey on Tuesday, quite cloudy over northeast England, southeast Scotland. Any early showers over the southwest should scoot away. And for many, it's a bright day tomorrow, bright, fine winter's day. Feeling chilly, temperatures starting off around freezing and only getting up to 3 or 4 degrees. Feeling colder with the wind across the south, particularly if you're stuck under that cloud across northeastern parts of England. A bit more cloud coming into northeastern areas by Wednesday.